So I think one of the realities as to why the Great Depression was so intense for so many people was that usually when you have recessions or depressions, you have one or two or three sectors that really feel the brunt of it. However, with the Great Depression and actually the most recent recession, we see a lot of problems in every sector that exists. So we have the Great Crash of 1929, we have issues with consumerism, so people aren't creating and manufacturing as many goods. We also have this crazy, intense Dust Bowl that occurs. And I linked a short film clip onto the bottom of this slide page. So I hope you guys look at this video, because I think it shows you visually, the impact of the Dust Bowl and what affected or why the Dust Bowl was so really intense at this time, and the impact that it had really on farmers. Between 1932 and 1939, about 50 dust storms, and these are major dust storms, turned 1,500 square miles into basically a dust bowl. The composition of migrant families really changed dramatically. It's not poor Hispanic Americans that are really dramatically affected, but it's really white Americans that are affected. 3.5 million people abandoned their ma and pa farms and went out west to see if they could find work on commercial farms in California, and the population in California dramatically increases. But I really encourage you to look at this film clip just for a second, because it's amazing what these people had to go through this period in the Dust Bowl era. So because of the push from those in the Southwest and the Southeast region coming over because of the consequences of the dust storms in the 1930s, a lot of Mexican Americans, specifically in California and in the Southwest, really felt the impact of the Dust Bowl and felt the impact of the economy. And a lot of it was because of the fact that most of these individuals were forced day laborers that had very little rights, even those who were citizens, and most of these individuals were citizens at the time. Repatriation occurred in Los Angeles, and Los Angeles and other cities actually deported Mexican Americans, often legal, to Mexico. And documents suggest, United States official documents actually, suggest that Los Angeles and San Diego counties deported over 35% of the people that they deported actually were American citizens. So the fear and the anxiety that was felt at the time, and the solutions that were put in place in order to try to alleviate some of the pain, obviously impacted, like I said, many classes within society, but Mexican Americans by and large were impacted a great deal because of the discrimination that they felt. Like I said, even those who were legal citizens and legal residents. Cesar Chavez became an extremely important figure at this time. He used his position in society, which was as a farm worker, a child of a migrant worker, who he himself eventually became a migrant worker as well. He used his intelligence and his position his experience as a farm worker to create the United Farm Workers of America, which only allowed American citizens and only allowed migrant workers to join. And what this did was it pushed for social changes across the board, because by and large, forced day laborers, even legal citizens, oftentimes are not paid the minimum wage. And I would say by and large are not paid the minimum wage, but that is one of the problems that we have with business in America, and that's one of the reasons why we have such extreme immigration rates. So this issue obviously is still one that we deal with today, but at this time, Cesar Chavez, like I said, was a voice for individuals to try to obtain some of the most basic rights for American citizens, because a lot of people had preconceived notions that all Mexican immigrants, or all Mexican workers, were immigrants, and they weren't citizens. Well, that really wasn't the reality. Over 65% of people who were working in the fields were actually legal citizens, but they were, like I said, being paid less than minimum wage, both at the federal and state levels. So I think it's a very interesting time and a very interesting relationship that we have, and I encourage you to read a little bit more about it in your books. Of the various segments of population The African American population probably struggled and suffered the most under the Great Depression. At this time, black unemployment reaches actually 50%, which is 25% higher than the rest of the population. We also have Jim Crow, which is still ruling the South. We have a lot of hostility and in the North and in the West. The Depression actually inflames racism, and because of the anti-immigration and really pro-Anglo-Saxon European descendant notion, this idea of nativism and of true Americans being white Anglo-Saxons, as I suggested earlier, really helped to inflame and cause more issues within the society. Usually, no matter what type of relationship you have, when financial problems exist, any underlying issues become more inflamed and become even heavier and more difficult to kind of struggle through. And this is really true for the relationships between African Americans, white Americans, Native Americans, Mexican Americans at this time. There's not a banding together. It's really more of a system or a situation in which people are kind of withdrawing themselves and, sorry, my puppy came in to say hi, withdrawing themselves and really turning to their communities, whatever community may be. The Scottsboro case was an interesting case at this time, and by interesting I really mean devastating, in which 10 young men were riding on a train, and 10 young African American men were riding on a train in Alabama, and at one of the stops, some white male counterparts actually got off and told the authorities, the local authorities, that there were men who were causing, African American boys who were causing havoc on this train. At the next stop, the police stopped the train and actually searched for these men, or these young boys really, and young men, and also found two white girls accused these young men of rape. Now, the Scottsboro case is interesting in that really by all accounts, and not even just the Civil Liberties Union, by all accounts, none of these young men received fair trials. And unfortunately, 2 of them were hanged, and a few more were actually put to jail. There were a few retrials based on the fact that the injustices that were occurring were getting national attention, which caused a lot of problems. But it really did very little, especially for those boys who were found guilty. African Americans, as I said earlier, turned inward. They turned to church. And not only in the African American society, but in white society, cults and other religious movements actually gain a lot of momentum and traction at this time. And so this is kind of the reality that African Americans struggle through, really all the way up until the war, and then we'll talk about the discrimination that existed and the segregation that existed even during the war.